Welcome back to Bloodlines and Beastmarks Podcast, where we dive into the world of folklore, mythology, and the supernatural. In our previous episode, we explored the ancient origins of vampires and werewolves, tracing their roots back to the myths and legends of ancient Greece, Rome, and Eastern Europe. Today, we take a different path, one that explores the evolution of these iconic creatures through the ages, from their earliest incarnations to the complex and multifaceted beings we know in literature and pop culture today. From the cursed blood-drinking monsters of the past to the suave, tortured antiheroes of modern fiction, the vampire and werewolf have undergone dramatic transformations. In this episode, we'll explore how the stories of these creatures have shifted through history, how they became symbols of deeper cultural anxieties, and how they came to embody our own internal battles with the supernatural, with desire, and with fear. The vampire, in its earliest forms, was a fearsome, bloodthirsty monster, a creature of the night, bound to the earth by its cursed existence. But over time, the vampire underwent a dramatic shift. No longer was it a mindless killer lurking in the shadows. It became a complex, tragic figure, an immortal being burdened with the curse of eternal life. The journey of this transformation began in the 19th century with the publication of John Polidori's The Vampire in 1819. Polidori's vampire, Lord Ruthven, was a suave, aristocratic figure, a far cry from the monstrous undead creatures that had been feared in the folklore of Europe. Polidori's work set the stage for the more sophisticated vampire that would emerge in later literature. But it wasn't until 1897 that the vampire truly became a cultural icon, thanks to Bram Stoker's Dracula. Stoker's Count Dracula took Polidori's aristocratic vampire to new heights, turning him into an immortal, calculating predator capable of great charm and cunning. But beneath Dracula's charming exterior was a monster, a creature that embodied the fear of foreign invasion, disease, and the corrupting influence of the unknown. Dracula represented a deep cultural anxiety that was born from the rapid industrialization of Europe, the fear of the other, and the tension between Victorian society's outward decorum and its hidden, repressed desires. Dracula was not just a monster, he was a symbol. The fear he evoked was not just about blood drinking and immortality, but about the breakdown of societal norms and the intrusion of chaos into the orderly world of Victorian England. The vampire became a metaphor for sexual desire, the corruption of innocence, and the fear of the unknown. As such, Dracula set the standard for how vampires would be portrayed in literature for decades to come. Following in Dracula's wake, the vampire evolved even further, taking on a more tragic, even romantic quality. In the 20th century, we saw a rise in sympathetic vampire characters. The idea of the vampire as a tortured soul, condemned to walk the earth for eternity, became a prominent theme. In works like Anne Rice's The Vampire Chronicles and films like Interview with the Vampire was no longer just a monster to be feared, but a character to be understood, a creature torn between the hunger for blood and the desire for redemption. By the 1980s and 1990s, the vampire had become a fixture in popular culture, thanks to films like The Lost Boys and television series like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. These portrayals continued the tradition of the vampire as both an antagonist and an anti-hero. The vampire, with its powers of seduction and immortality, became a symbol of both desire and despair, a creature that could be simultaneously monstrous and sympathetic. Today, the vampire has taken on many forms, from the angsty, emotionally conflicted vampires of Twilight to the dark and brooding figures in modern horror films. The vampire has become a symbol of human longing, pain, and the struggle for identity. The modern vampire is often a creature of inner conflict, someone who must reconcile the monstrous nature of their existence with the desire to retain their humanity. The vampire is no longer simply a creature to be feared. It is a reflection of our own internal struggles with identity, immortality, and the weight of eternal life. While the vampire was evolving into a tragic antihero, the werewolf followed its own path of transformation. The werewolf, once seen as a terrifying and uncontrollable beast, became a symbol of internal conflict, a creature torn between humanity and primal instinct. Like the vampire, the werewolf story can be traced back to ancient mythology, where shapeshifting was often linked to magic, curses, and divine punishment. However, it wasn't until the Middle Ages that the werewolf began to be viewed as a cursed human being. In many European legends, people believed that certain individuals were cursed to transform into wolves, either due to a pact with the devil or because they were marked by some kind of supernatural affliction. The werewolf, in these tales, was a tragic figure, someone who had no control over their transformation and was doomed to wreak havoc on others. The 16th and 17th centuries saw a wave of werewolf hysteria in Europe, fueled by superstition and the growing fear of witchcraft. People believed that some individuals had the ability to transform into wolves at will, and these werewolves were often accused of committing heinous acts of violence, particularly during the full moon. In places like France and Germany, witch trials and werewolf trials became commonplace, with alleged werewolves being put to death by burning, hanging, or drowning. But as the centuries progressed, the werewolf began to lose some of its monstrous edge. In the 19th century, we saw a shift in the portrayal of the werewolf in literature. One of the most famous early works to deal with the werewolf as a central character was The Wolfman, written by Guy Endore in 1933. Endore's werewolf, like many subsequent portrayals, was not just a mindless beast. It was a tragic figure, a man cursed with an uncontrollable transformation. Hollywood's golden age of horror, particularly in the 1940s, saw the werewolf evolve further, thanks to films like The Wolfman, 1941, starring Lon Chaney Jr. This film solidified the image of the werewolf as a man who, when afflicted by the curse, could not escape the brutal nature of his transformation. The werewolf in these films was not simply a monster to be hunted. It was a person trapped by a curse, forced to struggle with the duality of their existence. Throughout the 20th century, the werewolf continued to be portrayed as a tragic figure, caught between human reason and animalistic instinct. In films like An American Werewolf in London, 1981, and The Howling, 1981, the werewolf is not just a beast, it is a symbol of humanity's darker impulses. These portrayals emphasize the internal conflict faced by the werewolf, who must grapple with the urge to transform and the guilt that follows their actions while in their animal form. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the werewolf had become a figure of deep sympathy. The idea of the werewolf as a cursed individual struggling with their transformation resonated with audiences, leading to more nuanced portrayals. In TV shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Teen Wolf, the werewolf becomes not just a creature of horror, but a symbol of coming of age, of learning to control one's darker impulses, and of finding a way to live with the curse of transformation. As we move into the 20th and 21st centuries, the vampire and werewolf are no longer confined to the pages of folklore or the dark corners of literature. These creatures have become cultural icons, adapted and reimagined in countless films, television shows, and books. But how did they come to dominate the pop culture landscape? In the 1980s and 1990s, the rise of horror films like The Lost Boys and Buffy the Vampire Slayer marked a major turning point for the vampire. These works portrayed vampires as both villains and antiheroes, with characters who were simultaneously monstrous and deeply human. The Lost Boys, 1987, introduced a new kind of vampire, one that was both stylish and rebellious, tapping into the youth counterculture of the time. Similarly, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, 1997 to 2003, brought the vampire into the realm of teen drama, exploring themes of love, loss, and identity, while still maintaining the vampire's role as a creature of horror. Meanwhile, the werewolf also saw a renaissance in pop culture. Films like An American Werewolf in London, 1981, and The Howling, 1981, explored the werewolf's tragic nature, while also emphasizing its monstrous qualities. The 1990s saw the werewolf enter the realm of teen television with shows like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and later Teen Wolf, 2011 to 2017, where the werewolf became a symbol of adolescence and self-discovery. In these shows, the werewolf was no longer just a terrifying creature. It was a metaphor for the struggles of growing up, for the battle between one's more animalistic desires and the demands of society. Both vampires and werewolves became symbols of transformation in the 21st century, reflecting our ongoing struggle with identity, change, and our darker impulses. Whether in the sparkling vampires of Twilight or the conflicted werewolves of Teen Wolf, these creatures continue to captivate our imaginations, representing the complex relationship between humanity and the supernatural. In today's episode, we've explored how the vampire and werewolf have evolved from simple, terrifying monsters into complex characters that embody deeper truths about human nature. These creatures are no longer just bloodsuckers and beasts. They are metaphors for our deepest fears and desires. Stay tuned for the next episode of Bloodlines Beastmarks Podcast, where we'll explore the clash of the shadows, examining the rivalry and connection between these two legendary creatures. Until then, remember that the darkness is never far behind, always waiting at the crossroads of our own desires. For more stories that delve into the mysterious and magical realms of mythology and folklore, don't forget to visit Mythic Cosmos. There, you'll find more videos on creatures, legends, and ancient myths from every corner of the world. Thank you for being part of today's exploration. And remember, the world of myths is ever expanding. Stay curious, and until next time, keep seeking the unknown.